Yeah, I feel like yeah. I just,
Yes.
Really. I do. That's why I said that. I don't think very they still this is nice day. I had it sitting on
Is the seat taken?
Oh my God.
different.
Yes, it was taken by Frank, but he can sit on the other side. No, you're fine.
Should we just text each other? These South African here.
If everybody will settle in, we have attention, please. Just want to welcome everybody to our public zoning workshop here for the Village of Ballston Spa. I'm Mayor Frank Rossi Jr. And again, just want to welcome everybody and say a couple opening remarks to help set the scene for tonight. First off, amazing turnout again. So thank you for everybody that has an interest and a passion for our village and the place that you live, that we all live, work, and play in here in the Village of Ballston Spa. It means a lot to see everybody here. I think I said the other day, tomorrow marks 3 years for me as being mayor of the Village of Ballston Spa. And it's kind of poignant because when I came in as mayor 3 years ago, we were in the middle of comprehensive plan. And so here we are in the natural next progression of it, of the zoning process. But you can see how long it can take to sort of get things right, to move things along in our village. But the finish line is in sight. It is a marathon, not a sprint. And I say that because Chris Crucial, who'll be talking to us and presenting soon, is a marathon runner, actually, just ran the Tokyo Marathon in much better shape than I am right now, I can tell you. But tonight, we just want to remind everybody, you're asking Chris if he had any war stories about doing presentations like this. He said none jumped to his mind. So hopefully we're not that community. We're not that village. He gets to mention to somebody else as, you know, that place. We are a very respectful community, passionate at times, but I just want to remind everybody, ask your questions. Nothing is off limits per se, although I'll tell you about a couple things in a second, but nothing is off limits. None of us are married to anything in the code that you've seen. You're not hurting anybody's feelings when you bring them up. Bring them up respectfully as always, again, but this is a lot of work from our Zach, which I do want to thank the members of the Zoning Advisory Committee, regardless of what the hubbub has been. They worked their butts off for over a year and a half on what you're seeing. And is it a perfect document? No, but it was never going to be a perfect document because we have months to go still on this work. So if I could ask you for one moment to give a round of applause for the ZAC members in here. So Chris took what he had from the ZAC and other things, and he basically worked on what you saw, or 160 pages, I believe it is. And again, we want you to tell us where there's something that looks askew or it doesn't reflect our community or your part of the community well. That's what we're here for. There are going to be a lot of things that we don't necessarily pick out right away. That's where you come in, and tonight is important for that reason. The topics that are going to get some special treatment that are not technically tonight things for Chris to talk about, because they could fill up 4 hours themselves, honestly, are historic preservation, because honestly, we keep getting a lot of different opinions on this one, and we finally came to a point where we said we've got to separate this out and treat it on its own. We do need to go there, and we're going to go there. It's going to get its own set of public comments. It's going to get its own set of public hearing down the line. So actually, by separating it out, it's going to have a lot more focus at a certain point. Also, PDDs. You may hear from time to time that I don't always agree with Trustee Ben Baskin, but actually he and I agree on this, that what was in the draft, unintentionally, it should have been actually taken out, but what was in there doesn't reflect the best situation for our community. And we were working on something a few years ago that we need to go back to and finish out what we had started to make sure it's more representative of our community in the hopes of PDDs, planned unit development districts. Also, ADUs, which are accessory dwelling units, and short-term rentals. This is because the state of New York decided at the end of last year to change the game on short-term rentals. And they're very inextricably linked in a community like ours with accessory dwelling units. So we're asking the county to get some help here because the county now has a new function with respect to short-term rentals, and they're trying to understand what that function exactly is and how it all works. If they don't understand it, we can't create code right this second about that as well. In those cases, the status quo remains. So for historic preservation, the historic district is still intact while we talk about what's next for historic preservation in the community. Lorraine McPherson, I think I saw her somewhere. She came in the other day. She's like, I want this in the map still. I want that cross hatching for the historic district in the map. And if you know Lorraine, you never want to make Lorraine upset. So I said, you know what, Chris, let's get it back on the map. And we did yesterday to make sure everybody understood it is still there and it's not going anywhere in the foreseeable future, if ever. So things like that, we understand. We're not trying to confuse you. We're all trying to learn in the process here to make this the best possible community we can make it. Before Chris gives his presentation, which will be followed by questions from all of you, Alex Finocchio, who is our attorney tonight, she's going to be kind of the enforcer per se. She's going to drop the ground rules for all of us. Not that we need them, but it'll make the night go a lot faster and smoother. But for one more time, I just want to say to everybody here, thank you. On behalf of all the Board of Trustees, thank you for coming out and showing your passion and love for your community. We do appreciate it. Alex?
Good evening, everybody. All right, so here are the ground rules. I'm going to read them verbatim so there's no misunderstandings. The first one is anyone who desires to speak during this meeting must sign in on the sign-in sheet. Comments and questions will occur after the presentation. Marilyn is holding up a sign-in sheet in the back. If you would like to speak, as soon as I'm done reading the rules, please feel free to go back there. She will bring them up to me. Once everyone on the sheet has had a chance to speak, anyone who has not spoken will have the opportunity. When speaking, please begin by stating your name, address, and organization if applicable, though none of this information is required. Any and all statements or conduct that involve personal, impertinent, or slanderous attacks on any group, organization, or individual, regardless of whether that individual is named and is present, are prohibited. Any and all statements or conduct using profane, vulgar, threatening, racial, ethnic, or in any way discriminatory slurs or gestures are prohibited. Any disruption to the meeting with loud outbursts or other disruptive conduct or behavior, including but not limited to obscenity, heckling, taunting, cheering, verbal, physical threats, physically threatening conduct, abusive language or conduct, or any similar actions is prohibited. Failure to comply with the enumerated ground rules may result in you being asked to leave the premises. There is also a copy of these ground rules in the back. And without further ado, Mr. Christian.
Everybody, can you hear me okay in the back? Okay. So Chris Kushel, it's nice to see you all again. Just wanted to echo it's such an amazing turnout for this subject. So it's great that you're all here. I see a lot of the same faces. I think I see a number of new faces as well. So I'm going to give a bit of a presentation now to give an overview of this code. It'll be fairly high level. Again, we're dealing with a nearly 200-page document. And then we'll get into your comments and questions. So I'll start a little bit of a recap, which I discussed last time. So there's really three goals in my mind for this project. First was, so we're developing a new code. So there's an option of taking your existing code, which is, 30, 40 years old, and making some minor modifications to it. Or there's the option of actually still take into the pieces from your existing code as applicable. And fairly early on, the zoning advisory committee agreed that this is an opportunity to start fresh. And so by doing that, we want to address existing issues that are in your code. And I have a couple examples there on the right side. So for example, you have a lot of these dimensional standards in your existing code that don't actually reflect what is there in your community today. And that's fairly typical. You have communities that developed, and then you had zoning code that was written later, and those regulations that were written later weren't really done in mind with what's there. And that might be okay if you actually don't like your community and want to see it very different. But we know here people like their neighborhoods. And so what we're trying to do is make adjustments to the dimensional standards to actually reflect what's there. And that reduces the burden on the Zoning Board of Appeals, which has to see a lot of these unnecessary requests for variances. There's a number of issues in the existing code where the process, it really wasn't clear. It was actually, often I'm trying to cut down existing zoning codes. In the case of Ballston Spa, it was actually quite short and really was missing, I think, a lot to help with that. So that's one of the things we're trying to do. We want this to be a modern sort of best in practice code. So no offense to the attorneys in the room, but many zoning codes were written by attorneys, for attorneys, and not really decipherable by anyone else. And modern codes are really intended to be written in a way that uses more concise language, makes use of diagrams and tables to help explain concepts, and also has a logical organization. Now, that being said, this is a legal document. And so there are aspects where legal counsel is going to amend the language to comply with that legal standard, because this isn't a comprehensive plan, which can be written in a very different way. These are your actual laws, so we have to write them in a certain way. And then finally, we want this to align with the vision. And that's where we have a number of stakeholders providing their input. We look to your comprehensive plan. We look to your boards that are kind of working day in and day out using this code. And that's why it's led to some modifications of some of the districts that I'll explain. We try to increase the flexibility in some situations to reduce the burden on the boards. And I just know, generally comprehensive plans and other plans set forth a vision, but there's often different ways to establish, to achieve that vision. And I think that's where there can be a lot of, spirited debate about sort of what is the best way to get to the same goal. In terms of the schedule, so we've been working on this for over a year now. We're aiming right now for the summer to have this adopted. I came back in October for a public forum. We're now here again. I'll take the information that we hear tonight and over the next couple of weeks, gathering comments. I'll synthesize it. We'll make some changes or at least raise some issues to elevate to the village board. I'm sure I'll get lots of direction from the village board, and then we'll go through the adoption process. This isn't the only bite at the apple in terms of providing comments. There will be public hearings, so there's other opportunities as well. So just a reminder for those who, maybe just a show of hands, who did come to the October forum? Yeah, so about half to 2/3 maybe. So that forum was a little bit more open-ended. So I gave a very brief presentation. Then we had these different stations around the room where people were providing their input on a whole host of different topics. I thought we had some great conversations there. And so what I and my staff have been working on is trying to take all these different inputs, essentially. This isn't a purely technical exercise when it comes to writing a code. There's a lot of art to it because there's no one right way to do it. There's a lot of different voices. So we're trying to synthesize what are hundreds, if not frankly, thousands of comments into this new code. And so as I think the mayor stated at the beginning, I'm sure I haven't gotten everything right on this pass, and this is probably the third pass. We're still going to iterate on this. But we had comments from the ZAC throughout in different means. They've commented on the existing code. They've commented on the some of the drafts that have gone through them. We've gotten comments from the public as well as the different boards and the building inspector, who are all some of the key stakeholders. We try to find consensus on a lot of these topics where we can. We can't always. We try to find compromise where that's possible. And if not, we also try to mitigate some of the concerns that might occur for different topics as well. I also just want to give a quick note about sort of the limitations of the community input. I'm very appreciative of you all coming here. This is certainly one of the best turnouts I've had at a community, certainly of this size. And I think that's a real testament to both everyone getting the word out and your commitment to coming here. But even then, if we have, let's say 100 people here, it's still a small percentage of your community, right? So that's what, 2% maybe? So you just have to keep in mind the limitations of thinking through our comments representative of everybody, for example. And so ultimately, this is why you have a village board of trustees, your elected officials. They're the ones that are going to provide the final decisions on any different factors within this code. All right, so I'll transition now to talking a little bit about the code itself. So the first thing, if you do compare it to your existing code, there's a bit of a reorganization, and there's some different articles and headings. I would say it's nothing sort of revolutionary in terms of how different it is. Articles 1 and 2 are the same. I changed terminology to definitions just because that's what's more commonly used these days. There are some aspects in your existing code, for example, you have a whole article about site plan review. In this code, that is now within Article 11, because it's kind of logically, in my mind, goes with some of the other types of procedures that you have as part of your zoning application process. So I'll go through these, and I'll kind of cluster some of these articles together, and I'm going to go through quite quickly. The other thing I just wanted to note, the attempt here is to have a logical organization and also a way that we can make amendments to what is in this code and add, make additions and make subtractions, right? The intent here is we're not going to adopt a code that we don't touch for 20 years again, 30 years. These are best in practice zoning codes are intended to be living documents where in a year you review things and say, hey, this didn't work that well, or this wasn't really clear in the process, or we have this dimensional standard, but really it should be this instead. And the intent is to be able to make those changes. 20 years ago, we didn't have Airbnb, so that's not addressed in a lot of zoning codes, right? We don't know in 5 years what's the next thing that needs to be addressed in a zoning code. And so the hope here, even from something as basic as the way the numbering system is compared to your existing code, is that we can make these changes relatively seamlessly. So Article 1, these are general provisions. This is introductory language. There's a lot of boilerplate legalese in here. Article 2, these are your definitions. Every zoning code has definitions. We made a lot of changes. Intent is you shouldn't be defining words if it's not in your code, because that's the whole point of having these definitions in the code as opposed to just looking up in a dictionary. So we've removed a lot of definitions. We've added some new ones in based upon the new code. We've done a lot of updating of the existing definitions to try to make them clearer where that's applicable. In some cases, adding some diagrams so that we probably can't read, but that's trying to clarify the definition for building height from what's there today. Article 3 then discusses the zoning districts themselves. So I have two maps on here. On the left side is the existing zoning map. On the right side is the current proposed zoning map. This has already gone through some multiple iterations. So, for example, when people came in October, we had a lot more districts than what's there now. So your existing zoning map, if you see all that bright yellow, most of your community is the exact same zone. And so we made an attempt to give that more nuance by having sort of zones that were better aligned to different neighborhoods. The feedback from the ZAC, members of the ZAC, as well as from the different boards was that, well, we went overboard and we had too many districts. It was going to be really hard to administer that. And frankly, there's no real need to, because even if you have different neighborhoods, from a zoning perspective, which isn't the same as your neighborhoods or your land use, there was no difference. So what we did now is we have these two, what was your R1 district, which generally means single family residential district. We split it up into an R1A and an R1B. Really the only difference here, and that's the kind of on the northern end, that sort of lighter orange color is the 1A. Those are areas that have developed later on in your community. And you can see just by the lots, they have their newer neighborhoods, they have larger lots, they have deeper setbacks. And so this provides a little bit of nuance and the ability also in the future, if different neighborhoods want to make some changes that they don't apply everywhere, they can just apply to these neighborhoods. We added a place called a downtown transition. This was in your comprehensive plan, and this helps to try and make a transition from your downtown, what's today called your central business district. Right now we're proposing just to call it downtown. It's a little bit more modern nomenclature to help transition those properties to the single family residential districts. We got rid of some obsolete districts as well. So the Article 4 then talks about the districts. So it goes through each of your districts, and the general format for each of the districts is there's a description and a purpose statement, just a little sketch diagram that's just sort of intended to sort of convey what that neighborhood is. And then it provides your dimensional standards. And then for some districts, we have some other standards, some design standards where we think that's applicable. So in your residential districts, now we have three. We went from an R1, like I said, to an R1A and an R1B. You already have an R2. The attempt here was to not change sort of what's allowed in this district, but to make some minor modifications to things like your setbacks to better reflect what's actually there today. Again, with the thought of reducing the burden on the boards that just have to go and address these variances, which are sort of unnecessary. So what is your central business district, calling it the downtown? Again, the boundaries of this should be pretty much the same. It's one of the things that we'll want to hear from you, whether it's tonight or through written comments about, are there certain parcels that we got wrong in terms of which parcel belongs where? Because again, we're doing a lot, we're trying our best, but you guys will know these properties, that some of these we might not have everything right. One of the things again that the Zach had wondered about is, why do we even need minimum lot sizes in your downtown? And I fully agree with that. So there's no minimum. That's kind of considered a best practice in many downtowns in the state. We also added some design standards, fairly simple, and I should say that these are applying for new buildings. So if you're doing some sort of redevelopment or some sort of zoning application that affects an existing building, your existing zoning code has a facade review provision, and that's still in the proposed draft as well. This applies for new development. These design standards can really go from non-existent, which is sort of the old way of doing things, to very prescriptive. Sort of the approach that here is it's less prescriptive. It's more about some basic principles and standards for new development that we think would make sense. But again, you could have some thoughts in terms of what should be added, or if something isn't clear, or if something should be taken away from this table. That's why we're here. Highway business, this is the same essential boundaries that you have today. This is all along on the northern end of town. This is generally sort of your strip mall-y kind of areas that many communities have. It's sort of that auto-centric kind of businesses in large part. We made some modifications to it, or proposed modifications. In your comprehensive plan, it talks a lot about this area being a more attractive gateway into the village. And so as part of that, what we did was include these what we're calling frontage standards. And so these are essentially landscape requirements along the front of the building as part of that to hopefully help achieve that goal. And then just to touch on a couple of the other districts, there really was not much change. Some of them just changing the name of one of them right now. Very little changes to your existing industrial district, which is very small within your community already. You already have an adult use district. Nobody wants an adult to allow sexually oriented businesses, but you have to. That's essentially Supreme Court sort of settled law. And so the one change that we're proposing, I think that would be a big benefit, is it's the exact same location, but today all you can do are the adult uses as part of that district. We're proposing that it's an optional district, that underneath that you could also instead develop under the requirements of the downtown zoning, which I think would be a higher chance that people would prefer to develop under that. So I think it's a way to comply with the law, but really incentivize alternative uses. I would envision, we're not going to talk about the PDDs here, but I would think that within this Article 4, so again, whether it's after this code is finished or concurrently, that there is a logical place for it to go. I would think Article 4 might make sense for that. We also have right now a provision called a residential cluster. These are essentially smaller cottages clustered together on larger parcels. There's probably not too many opportunities in the village, but it's an option. One of the things we heard is that you really don't have many opportunities for more single-family homes, right? There's probably opportunities for apartments. We're seeing there's lots of demand for that, but where are you going to build more single-family homes? This is one of those options where you can get some of those homes. They tend to be attractive to smaller households that might be empty nesters. It could be younger families just starting out. And so we also asked this question during the last forum, and people seem to like this. So, again, there's there's obviously details that need to be ironed out. And so, you know, we want to hear one, if you don't like this at all, great, we can just remove it. But if you do, but you have some comments about it, then we can make those amendments to try to get it done right for Ballston Spa. All right, so then Article 5 deals with the uses. So you have a use table. It's right now kind of a separate schedule. We're going to include it right in the code itself. It's a lot easier to look at that way for most people, I think. We've tried to align it now with the new slightly different districts that I talked about earlier. It's been reformatted to hopefully be a bit more user-friendly. We've tried to clarify some of the uses that are allowed. So for example, kind of strangely, you have in your existing zoning code, you have offices for the village offices, and you have offices that are state, county level offices, but you don't just have offices for private development. I'm sure there's a way that the building inspector allows it, but this just adds that to the use table because you should really have that. So that's just one example. We try not to, again, and I should say this, that throughout this code, again, leaving aside the 4 items that the mayor spoke about earlier, there's nothing in here that is intended to be revolutionary by any means. We're trying to have this sort of conform with what is already in the village and trying to make it work better. And so that's sort of the mentality that we also tried to take with the use table. Again, that's not to say it's all perfect here, but that is sort of what we're trying to accomplish. The other thing we have is now we're adding this use standards section within this article. And so certain uses that warrant some additional requirements or additional guidance, again, this is a logical place that we can add this in. We have some of them in today. There could be other ones that the village decides we need now, or maybe you do in 5 years. Say, hey, we really need to add some additional regulation to whatever this use might be. One example is mixed use development, what that means in your existing code. One of the issues I found was it doesn't allow nuance for what mixed use means in different parts of your town. So in your downtown, mixed use generally should mean ground floor, you have your commercial space and you have some homes above. In the downtown transition, it allows the ground floor commercial space and a home on that first floor, because those transitional homes are homes for a lot of people as well. So you have that option. In your highway business, you already allow mixed use, but this clarifies that along the frontage, you probably want that to be commercial on the ground floor. If you have a really large, deep parcel, you probably don't need every single building to be mixed use. And in fact, if you do that, you're probably going to have vacant spaces on the ground floor, because I see that time and again within Western New York and Central New York. And so that's one of the reasons for making those distinctions. So then Article 6, these are general site development standards. These are just things to hopefully mitigate issues from properties and how they affect neighboring properties, both during construction and afterwards. There's a lot more here than what you have today. So the hope is that this is a benefit to the village. Of course, it does mean it needs to be enforced. So we have the enforcement provision, but that's only as good as the actual enforcement that occurs. But at least we have the ability on the books now, potentially. Off-street parking is always a kind of a touchy subject, I find. We really didn't make many changes here. We essentially kept, for the most part, what you have in your existing table, but we added a distinction for the downtown area parking, because often we find that downtowns should be treated differently from other parts of your community. And we're not saying drastically differently, but for example, in other parts of your community, you might require 2 parking spaces for a home. In the downtown, it's 1.5 spaces, because you tend to have smaller household sizes, and people tend to be able to walk to at least some of the areas for some of their trips. Signs, we kind of started from the drawing board because there are a lot of issues with your current sign, according to your boards. I will say dealing with signs is sort of fraught because there's a lot of First Amendment issues that can come up when you're developing sign regulations. The way we generally deal with this, there's only a very small handful of firms really in the country that are experts at this. And so what we tend to do is we rely on precedents, and then we bring it in, and then we make some changes to try and make it fit within this community. And so that's what we did here. And so we worked again with the planning board, especially that deals with a lot of these issues day in and day out to understand what they think would work and what issues they're seeing. We got input also from the zoning advisory committee. So for example, it's sort of unanimous that that the village doesn't want, for example, animated signs in the community. So we are now expressly prohibiting certain signs that that the community would not find desirable. And we can do that as long as we're not, the basic key is we're not regulating the content. We're not treating different types of signs differently. You can't treat a church and tell them to do one thing and a business to do something else, for example. And then these final articles, really these deal with process and procedures. I would say that most of this is, again, people are welcome to read it and provide comments. In my opinion, most of this is really of concern for the most part by the village board, planning board, the building inspector, the historic commission, the zoning board of appeals. Just a couple highlights. We made changes for who issues special permits in not all cases, but in many cases. And that's in keeping with best practices. Generally speaking, for most special permits, that they should be done by the planning board. And if you're wondering what a special permit is, we have uses that are by right. And that by right doesn't mean you can just do it, but it means you can do it as long as you're following the certain criteria that's established for it, whether it's height or other criteria. And then we have special permits, which is a yes, maybe, essentially. If you're going for a variance, that is a no, unless maybe. So a variance is a very, very high bar to get a use variance. A special permit gives some discretion to ensure that it makes sense for that specific property. We have this new addition called an administrative adjustment. Again, this is intended simply to help reduce some of the burden. So this allows some minor deviations from what's in the code to, rather than having to go to the zoning board of appeals for a variance, the planning board as part of this site plan approval process could, but they're not obligated to approve it. So for example, it's like up to 10%, I think, for different dimensional standards. So if your side setback or your front setback, let's say, is 20 feet, you could go to, and it's 22 or 18 feet, you don't have to get a variance for those 2 feet. That's the kind of concept behind this administrative adjustment. And then non-conformities. So these are things that you have that aren't allowed, essentially. The village has many existing non-conformities. And so dealing with that is a challenge for many communities. So in some cases, we're changing, like I said, dimensional standards. In some cases, we could change uses, but we try not to go drastic on that. So in this case, if you have, let's say, a two-family home that is in what is zoned for a single-family district, there's now at least a pathway for this to still sort of continue to exist, essentially. All right, so I'm going to be handing it off to Alex to handle the questions and comments. The one thing I wanted to just note here is we are going to take written comments by email. You can see it there, villageadmin@ballstonspa.org. I recognize that not everybody's comfortable speaking in such a large group. And I would say that your comments are just as valid as people who do feel comfortable. So don't feel obligated to speak tonight. You're not going to be penalized in any way if you prefer to send an email. And also, many of you probably haven't read this code at this point. This gives you the opportunity to look at different provisions and then provide comments or questions after that.
.gov.
Oh, I'm sorry, .gov. Everybody got that? Not .org, .gov. That is my mistake. Okay. There you go.
All right. I'm just going to get the list. Excellent. When I call your name, I will call you by name to speak. And you are welcome to stand. Like I said, please state your name and address and organization if you want and are comfortable. And then once we get through these lists, anybody who would like to speak afterwards. I'll have you stand. I'll be loud. I can be loud. Most people know here. I can be loud. All right. And I apologize in advance if I don't say your name correctly. All right. So first person is
That way.
David Schlitzer.
Good, yes. Yeah, so, thank you for, tackling this, the first priority in the comprehensive plan. You guys have done a really good job. When I kind of looked through it, I thought the downtown, the highway district looked pretty good. I mean, at first pass, I didn't see any problems there. I was concerned with the lack of parks. I didn't see any parks listed in there that, and that was something that was called out as, kind of needing to develop. The other thing that I didn't understand was, so the nonconformities and adjusting standards to kind of what we have. I mean, if you don't like the signs we have, why would you set the standards why wouldn't you set them to where you want to be rather than, what we currently have? So that would be one question. Yeah, I think that's, thank you.
Thank you. And the other thing I should mention, I will try to answer the questions to the best of my ability. Again, we're dealing with a 200-page document. I might not have the answers. So if I don't have it off the top of my head, I'll go back and get the answer and I'll write it down and I'll have it posted on the village website where we're posting the draft code, assuming that's amenable to the village. So in terms of this issue of open space, this has come up and we've talked about this a bit. Your land use map is just that. That is what you have for land use, right? That's what's existing today. That's what also the comprehensive plan has a future vision for what land use should be. That's not the same as what zoning districts are. So zoning districts, so your residential zoning district has, even in the table of uses, has open spaces, has parks as allowed. So it's not typical, it's not unheard of, but it's not typical that there are parks districts as part of zoning. There are some, it's a relatively new concept, I would say. I'm not fully convinced that that is the best way to protect your open spaces through the zoning, because zoning could be changed with a stroke of a pen. So what's there today isn't necessarily protected forever. There's a number of mechanisms in New York State where when you already have something that's designated as a park, it actually takes an act of state legislature to change that use from a park to something else. So there's a lot of protections, and the zoning, again, is one of your strongest tools at achieving the goals of your comprehensive plan. It's not your only tool. And so zoning, I think we also have to be aware of the limitations of zoning. So there are things like, if people want lots of sidewalks, right, or fixing sidewalks, that's not a zoning issue, really. There's other mechanisms to help achieve that. They're worthy goals, and I 100% support them, but I wouldn't expect to find those in your zoning code. You had a second question about nonconformities. Nonconformities, I 100% again agree that if there's something we don't want, then we don't want to have we don't want to go to the lowest common denominator. What I was speaking about earlier tended to be related to your lot standards, because often you have setbacks or minimum lot sizes that are so much higher than what you have actually today on the ground. It's a very different, so that's where we're trying to match those types of things. So again, generally speaking, people like the neighborhood residential neighborhoods where we're living.
Right? Is that everything?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Jennifer Darrell or Darren? Jennifer at
Oh,
50.
I didn't sign up.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No problem. Martha Iacolucci.
Yeah, I'm here, but I don't have any questions.
Sorry, we had a different sign-in sheet.
Yeah,
There was
it was just
a
a sign.
column on a different sign-in sheet for, do you wish to speak?
Do you have a different sign?
Yeah. I don't think we were,
No, there wasn't.
That's
Spoke
okay.
the difference.
How about this? If I read your name and you don't want to speak, you can just say, no, thank you, Alex. I'll go on to the next one. Jessica Jones.
No, thank you.
Great. Ellie Dillon.
Well, now I have a question.
Okay.
I just want to know how flexible is the criteria for the downtown's transitional zone?
How flexible the criteria. I'm
Yeah,
not-
what does it encompass? It's a very vague term.
I apologize, I didn't put a slide to explain it. The intent is, it's intended that where we have some of these uses that maybe they used to be a single family home and they've been converted into a business. And so it's intended to be a separate district for that to be a little bit distinct from where you have your downtown, which have been your traditional like commercial spaces. So that's the intent of it. So the dimensional standards are slightly different. The design standards that apply to the downtown are not the same as they are for this transitional zone. It covers, I believe, and I have to go back because again, this is one of the details that I'll double check, but I'm happy to, rather than trying to remember everything off the top of my head, I'll put these details in as clear form on bullet points and post those.
Please.
I did that. Jean Relaya.
Relia, no big deal. Malta Avenue. Whatever. My question, I think you answered it, and I appreciate what you've done tonight. I really do. I think you answered it, but I just need a little more clarity around Kelly Park or the soccer fields. Do we have a mechanism in place with this zoning that say cluster single family housing to be built there?
Yeah, so so thank you. The question is, if you have an existing park, how do we protect it through the zoning? And so the answer is, it's not through the zoning, it's through these other mechanisms. So as I mentioned, a park that is designated as a park in New York State, and I'm not aware that this is the case in other states, but they can't then be changed to another use like residential homes unless it's an act of state legislature. So not actually a local village board of trustees. This is my understanding. I'm not a land attorney, but I'm getting 5 attorneys that I didn't offend earlier with my comments. Okay, Don.
Well, wait, I'm sorry, addendum. Like the soccer fields aren't a park by designation. Does that mean it's open season there? I just worried.
No, I mean, it's kind of soccer fields are generally, if they're owned by the public, if they're owned by the school, I mean, they're not going to be, your village is not in the business of developing single family homes, right? So it's.
I don't know where it's going. That's why we're here tonight.
As far as I know, no. I think there are other mechanisms, and again, this is something I will confer with the village officials about this, that in terms of that, and I.
Thank you.
Oh,
The
yeah,
soccer
sorry.
fields are not village property. They are in the town of Milton. The ice rink
I'm gonna
is in
ask
the village.
comments.
The other property is in the town of Milton.
Okay, that's a good clarification.
Moving forward, I would ask that if you do want to speak, all comments are welcome, but please just wait or give me your name, okay? All right, Jared Iapolucci, would you like to speak?
I would, yeah.
Great.
Chris, good to see you. Thank you for coming this evening. I just have a couple questions, and then I was hoping I could pose a couple scenarios, just from my understanding of the dimensional standards and everything. First, I'm curious, in the R1B district, the minimum lot size in dimensional standards is 4,000 square feet. When I reviewed the county GIS data that we had from the zoning advisory committee, I only found about 5% of all of the R1 properties in the village that are under 4,000 feet. And the majority of those are well under 4,000. So I want to understand where we got that number, 4,000 square feet from, if you can provide any information.
So I was in large part relying on the zoning board of appeals for what that appropriate number was, and I think we can take a second look at it, and if it's not appropriate, we can make adjustments to that.
Yeah, and so this kind of leads into one of the scenarios that I'm just interested in hearing from you on. My neighborhood is largely lots that are 8,000 feet or more. My understanding is if our minimum lot size is 4,000 feet, that would open up my neighborhood to subdivision on property.
Not necessarily, because you also have frontage, right? So most of those lots are probably kind of narrow but deep. You can't subdivide it without the public way. So it's, you have to make all of your requirements. Just because your lot's big, it doesn't mean you can subdivide it. So I think in most cases, the answer will actually be no.
And so, and I thank you for clarifying that. Other scenario I'm curious about, in the use table, the R2 district allows for mixed use development. The R2 district has also been expanded now to include Saratoga Avenue, the east side of Saratoga Avenue, and Ralph Street around Kelly Park. Again, my understanding, based on dimensional standards and the uses, that would allow a 3-story mixed use building to be constructed right near Village Pool or Kelly Park. Can you provide any clarity on that as well?
So in terms of where the expansions took place, again, this is where I'm very happy to get feedback, because if we added something that shouldn't be, then that's the kind of feedback that I need to hear. So yeah, if it's not appropriate, let me know that, and again, we can make that change.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. And I'll just add, I think this is a concern many of us, including many people who participated in the zoning advisory committee, have, that we're no longer involved in this process and able to review and discuss in a separate committee to provide that guidance. And I know, again, that's not anything you've done, Chris. I just want to make sure others are aware that that's the direction we're going. Thank you.
Mark Helva?
Pass.
Okay. Liz Biddle.
Nope.
Ed Daso.
I'm all set now.
Great. Timothy Welch.
No questions at this time.
No problem. John Cromie.
I have plenty. First of all, when the master plan or comprehensive master plan was being developed, it was talking about the open space, it's also talking about recreation. And you will have places that really should be separated from the other zoning in the village because of their recreational function. And they can be somewhat connected. Start at Brookside, Woods Pond, Garden Spring Park, take the Tedesco Trail, go up to the fairgrounds. The fairgrounds is in a residential district. That's not proper. That is an entertainment, that's recreation, and it should be treated differently. You can also take it down and include the municipal parks, go down the Kid Ross Creek to the municipal parks at Iron Spring, excuse me, at the swimming pool in Kelly Park, pick up the rec field that's in the village, the rail line, the former and current rail line that comes into the village to Milton Avenue, and also I probably ought to include in that the village cemetery because of its recreational potential. None of those areas should have any type of the other types of uses that you have there for the other zoning lots or zoning districts. That's why I'm also concerned that many of the provisions in the zoning law will encourage tear downs. The master plan wanted to preserve.
John, excuse me, will encourage what?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to expand. I will,
John, I'm gonna come over to you.
yeah.
Did you say tear down?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay,
Tear down.
thank you. Can you hear me now? Okay,
Sorry, John, I'm a
Okay.
little deaf.
all right. Is this on?
Yeah.
I was talking about the educational portions of the village, whether it be Brookside, the fairgrounds, we can connect them with the creek and the other parks, just to make sure that those uses, those areas are not able to be used as other districts are in zoning. And that be a relatively open type of use so long as those properties are being used for the entertainment or educational value that they're been dedicated to. The other thing I'm concerned about is there are a lot of various provisions in the code that could encourage tear downs. And for instance, let me back up first. Talk about separating your residential districts from the north end of town and the south end of town. The north end of town was built primarily by people who worked in the factories. And they are smaller lots, smaller streets, smaller homes. The south end of town was built primarily by not only the factory owners, but later on in the late 1800s, early 1900s by the merchants in town. Those houses are much larger, the lots are larger, and the result is they're a little more flexible in what can be done, especially when you're talking about ADUs or other types of uses. Very different type of physical setup between those two types of housing. And I would suggest that the south end of town have a different residential zone than the north end. That is the old north end. I'm happy to see that all the suburban areas of town are treated similar. And that came out of the master plan. Now we're talking about tear downs. When you have, for instance, in R1, 2, or whatever it is, most of the village, the frontage can be 10 feet. Okay, that means you could take a house that's set back a ways in a large lot and put a couple houses in there. When you take the concept of the cluster development, you can do even more than that. In addition to the cluster development, those homes are dwellings. Under the current definition, dwellings will also include mobile homes. So first, we have to put mobile homes in a cluster development. In talking about a cluster development, the state law actually states in the village law 7.7.2838, the purpose of the cluster development shall be to enable and encourage flexibility of design and development of land, which is fine, in such a manner as to preserve the nature and scenic qualities of open lands. I don't think we have too many of those open lands that we need to preserve scenic quality of in the village. That is what the state says that cluster developments are for. I don't think it's appropriate here. The planned unit developments, I'm glad that's going to be under more study because they can also, if improperly put together, result in tear downs. The most fragile area in reference to tear downs is lower Milton Avenue. That has the exact same type of function requirements under the proposed law as the more traditional downtown. Those are generally residences. And you're not going to have, if you're going to have first floor businesses, that's counter to those types of structures. The other thing about that area is that because you can have restrooms built and anybody who builds a new structure has to have parking, it really cause the elimination of that particular portion of our village, which is in our main drag. And actually it has a lot of housing, which helps create the image of the village. We could lose that very easily. Now the downtown transition, the master plan committee determined that they wanted people to come to Ballston Spa to shop. And they wanted that shopping experience to be a good experience. So they could see a lot of things, do a lot of things, and really enjoy being downtown. Well, our downtown is basically Front Street and Milton Avenue. Now we're getting into a little bit of Washington Street. What the thought was to take the areas around the downtown, primarily Bath Street, a little bit of Thompson, lower Malta Avenue, and allow the residences to have a home business, something that they would have in their home and sell things from their home, not necessarily dedicate any portion of their home solely to a business. The idea being that people would then come to front street, no, let them put the walk. And start making groups and saying, especially on weekends, if mom or dad had a little extra business going on where they could sell things from their home, it would make things more interesting. And then when you're talking about the lower area, especially on Bass Street, that will provide the homeowner with a little more money to help pay the flood insurance, which most everybody has to do down there. Will also help give more value to the homes on Lower North Avenue. So it was supposed to be a win-win for that area. And for how it came up on the hill to this area where we're sitting now, I don't know. That's not what the original plan was. And the uses in the downtown transition do not have anything to do with what the master plan was coming up with, or very little, I should say. The other aspect that I'm worried about is there's an awful lot of discretion given to the planning board in the administrative sections. It takes the role of the zoning board as far as the granting variances essentially, and it should not do that. There's also provisions where the planning board will act and then the appeal is to the zoning board, but state law says the appeal has to be to the Supreme Court from decisions of the planning board. There's actually one point in which the planning board is able to set fees, which that's probably a mistake, because that's only the trustees can do that. So I think there's there's got to be a lot of looking at this code and perhaps doing a little more reforming. And what's that date? April 21st? We're getting written comments in?
Correct.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
No problem. So I'm not going to respond to all the comments. Thank you. I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to make some changes based on that. There were a couple actually incorrect things that I just wanted to note. So one is in terms of the residential cluster, the intent is not to allow mobile home parks. That actually came through from the zoning advisory committee. And so no, you're not going to respond to that actually. So the intent is actually, and it's explicitly prohibited in the code of mobile home parks. The issue about residential clusters, one of the provisions, which I probably should have mentioned, is there is a minimum size. So it's not like you can take every lot in town and tear it down and add residential cluster. So I just want to note that. There was a statement that the planning board is taking over variances, which is not correct. Variances are always the domain of the zoning board of appeals. And I also just want to note in terms of some of the other comments as it relates to the process that legal hasn't actually yet vetted this. So they are going to be doing their whole legal review, and there will be a number of changes related to things such as if we, miss something like that, the issue with the fees, for example. So we will be correcting that as well.
All right. Madison Lewis.
I actually was just curious about, I know that the comprehensive plan called out walkability, green space, and that is part of the charm of the village. So do you feel that the current zoning reflects these call outs?
I do, to the extent that zoning works towards achieving that. So walkability, what do we mean by walkability? Part of it is sidewalks, right, and crosswalks. And I mentioned that earlier, that's not really the domain of a zoning code. Walkability is also getting from a place of interest to another place of interest. So can we connect, is our land use set up in a way that people can live, for example, to where they need to go? I think by the nature, a lot of the village is set up that way, but it's not all set up that way. You want residential neighborhoods, and so that's going to be separate from your downtown, and some people will live closer than others. And walkability is also, is it pleasant to walk where you are? And I think the code does support that. I think the downtown, the design guidelines, for example, encourage, so one of the provisions is if you have a front yard setback in the downtown area, you can't use that for parking on your property, right? Because that's not appropriate. What is appropriate in a downtown is seating for a restaurant or, some sort of garden or some sort of thing that adds to the beauty of the neighborhood. And so the code attempts to achieve that.
I also would say that if you do have extensive comments, Mr. Comey reminded us that you can submit them to the email that's on the screen, okay? So I just wanted to remind people about that. Next, we have Kate Taylor.
No, thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to agree.
The green space.
Green space
Oh, I'm
and
so
and the
sorry.
historic charm. I'm so sorry. It's just, you didn't address all.
Okay,
three,
so historic charm, again, the historic district is being tackled completely separately. So I think that is one of the strong areas that issue of historic charm comes through. That being said, I also think that the design standards in the downtown support not mimicking historic architecture, but having the principles that I think help sort of complement that. So it's not intended to design a new building that is a fake old building, but has what are those principles? Having a large windows on the ground floor, for example, having a high first floor height, for example. In terms of green space, again, I was speaking earlier about and have Mr. Cromie's comments about whether we should have an open space or recreation district. I think ultimately, again, I'm not convinced that the zoning is the best way to achieve that. I'm very happy to write that. I think it'll ultimately be the village board telling me, yes, we want this, or no, it's not necessary. Like I said, I'm happy to do it. I'm not convinced that it's the best way to achieve your open space with the zoning.
Are you all set?
Yes, all 3 points were addressed at that point. Thank you.
Rebecca Smith.
I'm sorry, no.
No problem. Patricia Hallenbach. No. Great. Oh, there's more names on this one, sorry. Sean Hinckley.
I have to stand up.
You do not have to stand
Right
up.
on. Appreciate it. How's it going? Appreciate all the hard work on this. Could you explain maybe a little bit of the rationale why in R1A the increase on a rear yard setback from 25 feet to 50 feet? I heard you mention earlier that the intent of the changing of numbers was to reduce the number of zoning variances. When it's an increase in the rear yard setback, reduce the amount of usable space for property owners, thus potentially increasing variance requests for rear yards.
So you're saying that in your existing code is 25 feet, but it's being proposed to be 50 feet? Is that what it is? I don't have every detail.
Yeah.
So we'll have to check that why there's been that increase. I don't have the answer off my head on what specific reason. Maybe that sounds like that should be something changed.
Okay.
Doesn't sound right to me, to be honest.
Selfishly, as it relates to me, with my frontage, multiplying that by 25 feet, that is 3,000 square feet less that I get to use for my property, which is very close to the R1D minimum lot area. This is a substantial amount of property.
Yeah, we'll look at the rear setbacks.
Right.
Thank you for bringing
Appreciate
that
it.
to attention.
Thank you.
I did. I'm writing down. Chris Biddle.
No, we good.
Okay. Paul Farnan. Yeah, go ahead.
Take my phone, go ahead.
Thank you. Paul Farnan, McLean Street. I've been in the village since 1965. Can you hear me?
There you go.
Yeah.
Now I can.
And I've been on a number of boards. I was 12 years on the town of Ballston zoning board. Or, I'm sorry, town councilman. But put my reading glasses on.
Good and close up, Paul.
I want to talk about the historical district first. That's on one street over. It listed as R1. I think the historical district can all be put at R2, except where the laundromat is, all the way down to East Avenue on the right-hand side. That's mostly or all single-family homes and a closed bed and breakfast. Across the street are businesses and mostly two-family homes. And if you go down across to the west, High Street. They're mostly two-family homes, single-family homes that are two-family or more. You got the Armory and you got this building and other buildings that should be put as R2. And that would fit, and you could take, you're talking about a transitional section coming up out of the village. And that goes from Milton Avenue to Bass Street. That transitional area could be moved, leave it R2, but take some of the zoning that's in the downtown business district and make them special use permits under the R2. And that would fit that whole area. Now, if you go down, Mr. Cromie just talked about his area where he lives, Washington Avenue, all the way over to the chocolate factory, Bass Street, the St. Mary's School. That could be also made all R2. And you could take some of the zoning that's in the downtown business district, make them special use permits into that area. Then you can have your businesses, you can have people having little businesses in their homes, and you can have other things that are in the R2 area. The adult dwelling unit, that's kind of a touchy one to look at. And that's going to take a lot of thought, because that's just another term for two-family homes. So if you're in a residential area, all one, and you have a single-family home, and you're getting old, like me, I want to put an addition on my house so my grandkids can take care of me. That's if they want to. What happens when I pass on and they sell the property? Now it becomes an automatically two-family home. So that wasn't the intent of ADUs, but you made it that, and a person from outside could move into that, and now they have a two-family home. I don't think you want that. Also, the village lots are already undersized. Most of them are 50 feet, 60 feet wide. Do you want to have a detached ADU on your property? That isn't what we're looking to do on an R1, having a detached home on an R1 piece of property. If you do that and the lot size meets the code, you should subdivide it. If it doesn't, you just made an undersized lot way more undersized. The other thing is, we have trouble in the village now with stormwater management and sewer. Can the village handle this? If you start filling the village up with additional homes, I don't know if the village system can handle it. Oh, John Cromie mentioned something about, and I'll mention, the fairground being R1. We fought that a long time ago. The state stepped in on all fairground lands, I think they did, and they passed a law that said they take them right out of the village code. So the fairground can do just about anything they want up there. So I'll check on it, but I think I'm pretty much right that the state took them out of the village codes, and people screamed about it, but it didn't do any good. You have a place in the code to list committees. I hope you do. And remember, when the planning board, or I'm sorry, when the village board sets up a committee, that committee reports only to the village board. They should have no authority on their own. All committees that are set up should report to the village board. And if you've got an historical district, they should also report to the village board, or when asked for support, to the planning and zoning board. They should not be a standalone board. Everybody has a boss. The village board reports to every one of you. And all the committees and boards in the village report to the village board. And that's the way that should be. They should not have Tom Bullock say over things and nothing can be done about it. Should, final say should be the village. When the village, when the historical district was formed on the East High, on the East High Street, I sat on that. And the reason it was formed, and everybody knows, Rite Aid wanted to build a pharmacy right there in the corner. Everybody knew it. And what they're gonna do is tear it down, and the house next to it going down East High Street, and the following one after that, those beautiful homes were gonna be torn to the ground. So the people on East High Street got together and formed the historical district to go with West High Street. If you're gonna do anything like that in the rest of the village, you really need to ask the homeowner. You shouldn't pick blocks or buildings and decide you're going to be in the historical district. That isn't the way it should be. You need to talk to the residents of the village. Okay?
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Where did that take us?
No, I'm just happy to listen to everybody. I'm really glad you all came out. Thank you.
Alan Barber. I'm just gonna make that name up. Beverly,
No, that's me, but I'm not.
oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear
We
you.
just signed in.
Oh, no problem.
Nobody advised us that if you were signing in to.
Beverly Weber.
Hi, I'm Beverly Weber. I live in Colonial Hills, and you were talking about the walkability of the village. The village is not huge, and the subdivisions don't have sidewalks. However, to be able to walk from, say, my area, Colonial Hills, into the village, what I'd like to do, or bike into it, there are no sidewalks to give you safe passage for anyone. We've got a 2-lane street that comes down into the village on Bluefield, and there's no real walkability access that I would like to see to be safe and to be able to enjoy walking the village.
Thank you. I mean, it's a great comment. Again, just to reiterate that that is an issue that the village should be taking up. It's not a zoning issue, which really deals with the private property. But again, I very much appreciate the comment about walkability and safety.
Barbara Wolf.
Thank you.
Okay. Walter Smith.
Here, Walt Smith on Chester Street, which is the southeast corner of the village. My family still has about 7 acres of wooded property there. And of course, that is of concern as to the changes in zoning for that.
Mr. Smith, I'm just gonna ask you to hang on 1 second. Bring this to the
You're about to hear that.
Thanks for the ages.
A concern, I have not read this at this point, but have some concerns with regard to large pieces of property within the village that have not been built on at all. And this is in the southern zone, I think is the term that's being used. I have concerns to make sure that the taxes that have been paid by my family for a long time will not be, it will not affect how that property may be used in the future. Number two, I noticed on a map, I know that this is not zoning specific, but I noticed something about Southern Gateway down Chester Street. And that surprised me. That is a very residential area, and if one is planning on putting some sort of gateway through there, that would negatively affect that property.
Thank you for those comments. That's that gateway that you were looking at, something that the Zach brought really from the comp plan that's it's not in the zoning code.
Scott Biller.
From-
I'm so sorry. If I
Rowan James?
Okay. We'll call you out on your handwriting, it's fine. John Pillman.
Hi, I'm at East High Street, and does your zoning code have a provision in there about site plan review?
Yes.
So in the site plan review, I think we can say that as part of the review, you have to connect with sidewalks and vegetation and things like that. I think ultimately it's probably a planning board decision, but the site plan review section of the zoning code could identify sidewalks as being one of the required things.
Yeah, often it's sidewalks or connections within a property. It's not usually requiring a developer. It can be, but it's usually not for such a small projects requiring a developer to redo sidewalks that are part of the public right of way. But I will check what's in our site plan review right now criteria, and we'll make sure that there's something along those lines. Also, just wanted to give a just in terms of a time check. I'm told there is a hard stop by 9 p.m. So just letting folks know that.
If you do have extensive comments, like I said, you can submit them by email. That way we can get through these many sheets. Harry Chapman. Okay. Paul Burnham. I'm gonna assume that's enough. Okay. I'm so sorry. I genuinely don't know what this says. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna call out by address, and I'm gonna apologize in advance. 20 Hyde Boulevard.
All right, McPherson.
Okay, I see it now.
What is it, Lorraine?
Lorraine McPherson. Would you like to speak?
That's because I'm getting old now, you know.
No, that's not.
She's 39 and holding, trust me.
I wanted to just have a comment, a couple of comments. I would like to see us as we go forward with this, that we have better communication and better communication through visual material. I'm a visual person. My family laughs at me. I have to read a newspaper because that's what I've done for years. I love books. This is how I relate. So trying to come to terms with this meeting and wanting to understand what was going on, I had a difficult time because I couldn't read the maps. I had no idea what we were talking about. I went into the village, these black areas, and then there were some things that had a little color, but I didn't know where my street was. I was getting a little confused. So luckily, when I went to visit with the mayor, he did have a wonderful map that I think she brought today that, you know, I need to understand more, but in the future, really, I don't think I'm alone. I think it would be nice to have something visual to understand what we're talking about. And then my concern about this is the lot sizes, and you know, I'm still trying to come to terms with that. I'm just concerned that we're going to, let me backtrack. I moved to Saratoga many years ago, Saratoga Springs, when it was pretty low. And I went through the renaissance of Saratoga and I loved it. I thought I was within walking distance. I lived on Caroline Street. I could walk downtown. I used to take my children, my babies, and walk them all over the city. I walked downtown, I shopped. I loved it and I wanted to die there. I thought when I retired, I would go to the library and walk to the library. I would read the magazines in the library, have a cup of coffee. But Saratoga changed. It just became something I couldn't relate to. It saddens me, but we moved here And this is my first time ever living in a village. I've lived mostly in cities. And I've fallen in love with this village, and I feel very strongly I wanted to stay as close to what we have now, because I think it's a slice of heaven. If people are trying to, yes, politically we've gotten off track, but basically when you talk to your neighbor, you like them. People smile. There's just something special about this, and I just don't want us to lose it through a zoning that's going to say that maybe my property, my boulevard could be squashed, you know, maybe I can tear down and build 2 houses or squash it in, squash it in. You know, so whatever we do with this zoning, let's just keep it in mind of what we have and what we don't want to lose. So that's what.
We were just talking over, Lorraine, since you become my map guru. What we're gonna do is work with Chris to get a version that can expand without losing quality on it. And we're going to work with 80K or T-shirt graphics to try to get poster boards, probably about 6 or 7 of them, and place them in places like the library and other key locations for everybody. So look for that, and we'll make sure it's on our Facebook page as a website where they'll be available in case you want to see those. Give us till next week. Obviously, it'll take a little time to turn those around, but as you could also tell, we were finalizing that map to make sure it's reflecting historic district. We'll also try to get better cross hatching on the historic district, so it's showing a little bit more prominently. It's there. It needs to be a little darker, probably.
Just put street names on it, people will get it. Yeah.
Okay. Jim Snyder.
No, thank you.
All right. Keith Lewis.
Hi, Keith Lewis. First off, I want to say thank you so much for setting some ground rules for the meeting. It's so wonderful to be at a meeting where everyone is able to feel safe. And that's fantastic. So thank you for that. Chris, thank you for all the hard work, and the zoning advisory committee. Please, I cannot tell you, I wish you guys would just hold up your hands so everyone can see who we are, because we didn't get that completely. And this is a group that volunteered lots of time, lots of effort to get to. So thank you to both of you. You know, I'm curious because some of these subjects that we aren't approaching tonight were left until this point. And I'm wondering, you're our consultant, you're the guy who's carrying the ball down the field. Did you at some point tell us, no, we can't do this, we're going to just stay focused on these things? And was that a decision that came from you, or did it come?
The decision, for example, the PDD, no, it didn't come from me. For what it's worth, I think it makes a lot of sense. And whenever I do these projects, it's fairly typical that when you have these controversial hot button items, you deal with it separate. I think as the mayor said, it gives it extra scrutiny because you're going to spend a lot more time just on that. I also think, it helps focus, because my hope is that despite, the comments in terms of the feedback, that for the most part, people think that the proposed code is going to be a benefit to the village. And so it helps us focus on that and getting those little pieces right that we've talked about, such as that 50-foot rear setback, for example, that might have got lost if we spent 4 hours talking about PDD tonight.
Great. And the zoning advisory committee, I talked to a number of the members, and they've said they are still willing to work and continue their work in this arena so that we feel our voice is heard, because our comprehensive plan was something many of us worked really hard to flesh out and see that it was going to be listened to and ridden. I want to just give you some information, and maybe you can consider it when you're thinking about helping us, because we'd love to see you if that's possible. And that is that in the summer, we're looking at something, we're not going to discuss it now in the spring. We're going to kind of talk it a little bit later. You just so eloquently said these are kind of controversial. These are difficult subjects. In the summer, 40 to 60% of our meetings are dropped in attendance during summer months. And that trend is particularly relevant for a village where many families take advantage of the warm weather for vacations and outdoor activities. Additionally, we know that approximately 65 to 75% of families plan their summer around travel, which inevitably pulls them away from civic engagement. And moreover, during the summer, parents are often juggling childcare duties and seasonal activities. By moving these discussions, these more controversial, into the fall, rather than pushing them into the middle of July, and if you could give us a commitment, and if we could convince the zoning advisory committee to give us a commitment to help us do that, so that we could see this taken all the way to the finish line and not just 3/4 of the way down and then the most difficult portion. So I would hope you would consider that. I would encourage everyone to try and encourage that of you, if you can do it, if you can give us that time. I know that the budget has to be expanded, but it would be wonderful if we knew that the community's voice was being heard and it wasn't just being filtered. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm very happy to work on anything that the village wants me to do. No, I just want to clarify me again. I take my direction from the village, or not, again, what I want isn't necessarily isn't always relevant, right? So just want to clarify that.
Lisa Spadell. Sorry. No, that's okay. It's closer to most.
Just a couple of questions that I have, and Paul Farnham brought this up, and my mom, sorry, Frank, gotta bring this up. My mom lives across the street from PDD where they wanted that Walmart, and fought for a long time. Every person, me, everyone here, that whether it be a large piece of property or small one, has a right to do something with that property within the limits that are set within code, zoning, whatever it be. Paul Farnham brings up a good point. The village doesn't own the fairgrounds or the fairground parking lot. Those are two pretty large parcels. If you go up there and look, they're large parcels. My concern is, because I live up in that area, is that if we do these residential clusters and allow them, this is a specific question, how it's zoned now versus how it would be zoned in the new zoning for that district. I don't remember what it is. But is that going to make it so that right now you say you can have 50 single family homes up there, but if we rezone and make it so that these are smaller lots, now we can have 75. That increases the density up there, that puts on our sewer system, our water, our traffic, our walkability because of that traffic. And that changes the entire thing of this village. The fact of the matter is, the reality is, Saratoga County Agricultural Society, correct me if I'm wrong, they don't own that, but they can decide in 10 years that, you know what, people don't give a shit about the fair. People don't care about agriculture. People don't care about the wildlife that's up there. We care about money. So we want to sell this and we can make a killing. So I personally don't keep your lot sizes larger up there because it can happen. That's the reality. And we have to look at that reality. Change is inevitable. We might not like it, but it can happen unless we can stop it somehow with the zoning. But I personally don't see that happening. My other concern with that is, and I know we're not supposed to bring up PDDs, but say they want to put a Stewart's up there and a strip mall in the parking lot up there. Well, hold on a sec. Can they do that if you set up a PDD? I know that's not this thing, but something to think about. And another thing that's constantly on my mind, and I've brought this up at numerous meetings and whatnot, the county buildings. Yeah. The county has not said, we don't know. We were supposed to know 2 years ago. What are they doing? They bought a property in Malta. So hold on a second. You got a huge parcel over there that could be non-existent. You've got an existing parcel next to it that's now residential. That used to be an infirmary. That's a really big part of the village. Something needs to be thought about there too. Not against residential again, and do what people want to do with their property. But keep that in mind, we're on a rush plan here. Why? What's the county do? We need to know that too. Thank you.
In the interest of time, I will ask that the topics that we have said we're not going to be discussed today, please submit them in writing. All comments are welcome. I just want to make sure everybody has a chance before 9, okay? Amy Taylor.
Thank you.
Okay. Shayna Duffy.
All good.
All right. Ray Auden.
Otten.
Ray Auden. Oh, you're good. Sorry. I'm gonna apologize in advance again. I think this is Carl at 257 Malta Ave.
No, thank you.
All right.
All set.
Christina Moss.
Okay. Hi. I live on East High Street. I have a question actually about the accessory uses. Because, so actually I live in 1B, which also has a 50-foot setback on the rear now. So that's an increase. But the other thing is that it says miscellaneous accessory uses, talking about private garages, sheds, gazebos, pools, permitted but subject to dimensional lot standards. But you don't list what those standards are. Currently, I know like for sheds, the setback is different from from your house, right? It's like 5 feet from the rear and 12 feet from the side. Is that the same? Is it changing? I don't know what the.
Yeah, it was intended to mean, and we can clarify it, that it's, there's the, whatever the setback is, if it's 15 feet, for example, side setback, whether it's the principal structure or the accessory structure, it would apply to both of those structures.
So with a 50-foot setback, you can't.
Like I said before, we're gonna adjust that.
Yeah.
That was an oversight, so I've already adjusted that. Thanks.
Andy Moss.
I'm good.
Okay. Kathleen Gillett. Miss it?
Just a minute.
Oh.
Yeah, I was looking at the zoning, there was a very odd single-use zone. Called Mohegan Ridge.
Yeah.
I didn't see any other, it's the only one I saw.
Yeah, I can adjust that briefly.
Yeah,
That-
please, because
it-
I don't.
It's in your existing code. It's written in a way that is essentially written as if it were a planned unit development. If you read it, it's written in a way that has a lot of these very strong details. It's a single development. We're not messing with that anyway. It's actually already, as far as I can tell, pretty much built out. We put the existing language, we put it as an appendix for now, pending legal review. It's nothing changing to what's already there today.
It's just odd. Sorry, just one.
I don't disagree, but again, it's
Well, I
a
don't
very
like it.
specified kind of district that you
Yeah, I
can.
don't like it. I don't.
Okay, you don't like it.
We all understand.
Jen Moskowitz.
I'm good, but I would like to remind everyone it ends at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
And DACA.
Kira
And
Clark.
DACA.
I'll be very quick. Thank you, Mayor, for giving the new visuals, because I'm like my mom. I think my street now is in a downtown transition area. So my question is, under this downtown transition, because I have a house owned by a business owner in the community, another house that's behind. If it fits like everything that you're legally saying, could somebody theoretically then come into the downtown transition, tear down the house, because I think townhouses were in the downtown transition area. So theoretically, if you're in the downtown transition, they can come in, tear down, either build a townhouse or a business, as long as it fits the code.
Yeah, theoretically, when you have zoning, and if you're allowed to build to the zoning, you can develop according to the code.
So then my second question is, because I know we're not talking about the historic district, but I saw, I think, some overlay
of historic over the downtown transition area. So then will that be like adjusted, the historic when that's addressed of like, I'm just very concerned because I have the empty Agway property behind my building, my house, which I assume will be built. I think that's the end of downtown. Again, this is where I need visuals. I think that's the end of downtown, and then literally down the hill, it starts the downtown transition, and I can't tell where it all goes. So, I guess having further clarification, because then it just seems like, yeah, business can come in, things can be torn down if it fits.
Yeah, so we've heard a few comments about this specific district, so we're gonna take another look at the delineation and the characteristics and requirements of it.
Okay.
David Trombley.
David Trombley, Bath Street. My question is brownfields. We have two here in town. And my question specifically is the tannery one. I'm on Bath Street. Mr. Cromie is. Are we, as adjacent property owners, going to be kept up to date as to what is going to happen to that property? How was it are so our brownfields specifically mentioned in the new zoning?
So brownfields is not something I've ever seen actually explicitly addressed in zoning. You are going through a brownfields opportunities assessments process right now. I think it's started, my understanding. And so that is a whole separate project that we're not involved in, that we'll deal with that. Generally speaking, abutting neighbors to any developments, regardless of whether it's a brownfield or anything, I do need to receive notice on that.
It is a large parcel, 6 acres.
Yeah.
And that's quite a large parcel in the village. And what can be done with 6 acres is kind of interesting. So.
All set?
Yes.
Okay. Liz Cormos.
Hello, Liz Cormos, 89 High. Some comments on the definition section. I did read this thing about 3 times over, so I've had a lot of detail, but I'm just going over generally. The draft. Yeah. My husband says my voice is too low. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, the document has multiple missing definitions. For example, accessory dwelling units, ADUs, must include the clear specifications for what living, cooking, and sanitation facilities means. What do they mean? So do you have one or don't you? Distinguishing them from non-residential uses. Similarity to the terms like bed and breakfast and hotel and inn, they say transient, but they don't define transient. I think that should be limited. You can't stay more than a month. One of the key things is the building height. The way this draft measures building height is up to the midpoint of, in a regular roof. Our current code measures it from the top. So when the heights aren't equivalent, so basically we're adding about 4 to 6 feet in height everywhere by doing that. So I think that needs to be adjusted to mirror our current heights. Other definitions require refinement or inclusion, such as distinguishing between 3-family dwellings. We have a fair number. I think they should be included, maybe grouped together with 2-family. And multifamily regulations, ADA regulations apply to building with 4 or more units. So it makes sense to group the 2 and 3-family together. Also, there's a concept that's recently, last couple of years, called the missing middle. These are projects that have 4 to 12 units. We actually have quite a few of those in this village, those little apartments. Those should be separate from multifamily, from the larger ones, because particularly with new development, we may be okay, let's say in a zone, having a missing middle, type of apartment, but we don't want 120 units in that zone. Other terms like historic, temporary structure, assisted living facilities. I happen to work in that field. They're different than nursing homes. They should be separately defined. Zoning districts. The proposed redrawing of zoning districts deviates from the comprehensive plan, as we've heard. John Comey said southern and northern enders are very different. They warrant different standards. The transition zones near downtown are currently designated as R2. They need to be made transition zone and limited into what can happen there. Parks and recreation, I think because of the number of lots like the fairgrounds, the school properties that don't fall under park protections, we need to distinguish those. Also, the way the map's drawn, roads should not have different districts across the street from each other. If you look at other contemporary zoning efforts, a good example is Kingston, New York. I don't know if you've looked at their map. They draw the boundary at the backyard so that on both sides of the street, you have the same zone. District standards, we've already had folks mention the 50-foot. I think that's a big mistake. Why in the world would you take 25 feet off the back of everybody's property? You'll have a ton more non-conforming properties if you do that. Also, you need to have a separate for backyard shed. You mean you can't put the backyard shed? Currently, you can put it within 5 feet of your backyard. Maybe we want it 10 feet, but we don't want it 25. The outdated zoning from Mohegan Hill should be integrated into the R2 district rather than retaining its 30-year-old standards. You know, there is still some developable land there, and I think the rest of it should meet modern standards. We could create a district for senior housing. Downtown building heights should not exceed the standards unless approved by the village board. Sorry, I don't think that unelected people on the planning board should have that say. It should be the village board. The lack of a historic district has already been addressed. Not much more. PDDs, just briefly, throughout the village should not be allowed. They should be prohibited in any residential district and in the transition district. They should be capped at no higher than 50 feet and no more than 100,000 square feet total, and probably some other restrictions. They should be held to the district design standards. You can't go in and create a whole new zoning. They should, you know, an overlay zone would be much better than a PDD. The zoning advisory committee. It's a citizens committee, was duly constituted by the village board. It was charged with reviewing all zoning issues, not just the ones that everyone agrees on. They would take comments from the public, as they are doing here, and they generate recommendations. And I'm not sure why they're not, you know, there's been a controversy over that. I would like assurances that the ZAC be allowed to fulfill its mission, which it can do without a consultant if they don't want to pay the money, but I'd like them to do it with the consultant and not rush to try to get this done by the middle of July. I think zoning is the only way a community can guarantee what they're going to have in their village in the future.
Ben Basket.
I'm a trustee, so this is brief, but PDDs, plan development units or planned unit districts, keep your eye on those. That is a radical new addition to this zoning. If it happens and it means parcels like Angelica, you'll have lots of Mohegan Hill, different zoning patchwork all over the place. basically it wipes out the zoning that exists and puts in zoning that the developer brings. And then the village has to approve it, but it's brand new zoning. And so keep your eye on the PDD. They're saying not to work, you talk about it now, but don't forget about it. It's huge.
Yeah.
John Menzie. Monique Cohen.
Hi, I'll be brief. I have a couple of statements. I worked on the comprehensive committee as well, so I just, a couple of things that stood out to me, more so just statements. We talked about the setbacks at length, but I guess I just have a question. I live on Center Street, so now in the 1B district. I wonder how we legitimately enforce non-conforming properties, because we're not really talking sheds up there. We're talking whole homes. The two homes next to mine are non-conforming to their own property limits. So in theory, they shouldn't exist next to my house because of previous subdivision. So not a question, this is more of a legal question, I understand that, but I think when we look at this, the reality is we're not talking a shed, we're talking whole properties. So that's one thing. The next thing, I'll keep it brief. Do we have a date, or when can we expect dates of when we can talk about the things we're not allowed to talk about? I just want to know if we will propose those dates quick soon.
So when it comes to ADUs and short-term rentals, that's a state issue currently. Okay, so, and the county actually more so. So we are looking to the county to give us a little bit more guidance, because they're going to become the registry body. We become, whether we like it or not, the, investigating safety issues, issuing permits, etc. Problem becomes that the state is going to take a tax. The county is going to be taking a tax once they're allowed to. And the question becomes ultimately, is it fair for village taxpayers, if we're going to lose money on short-term rentals, to foot the bill for somebody else to make a quick buck in the summertime for a short-term rental approach? That's what we've got to evaluate. So that one, I can't give you any kind of clear indication besides, yep.
That's what I understand. I'm up to date on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, well, just in case others aren't, just so they know that we're not, hiding the ball and something
Yeah.
like that. PDDs, like I said, we're going to dust off what we had from 3 years ago. I think we had some changes proposed and never got entered in. Look at the entirety of the document. Also hand that over to our BOA folks to say, is there an opportunity for you to use it for BOA purposes? Would you prefer an overlay? We just don't know what the answer for that is. That is coming as well. With respect to historic district questions, that is become a little bit more convoluted, because the model code was presented. John Cromie had recently told us at our village board meeting that the existing code was obsolete, which we kind of knew from different things, but to hear him say it, okay, that's great. And he told us about the model code. We've been looking at the model code. There's some things that fit the village, some things that don't fit the village. But to use the model code for CLG purposes, you have to sort of run it through the state. So Francis Stern, whose name has gotten tossed around here quite a bit lately, at SHPO, has stated, could you show me something so that we can look at it? And so we're trying to take some first stabs at it to see where our limitations fall, and then come back to everybody and say, here's where we are. Also have Francis speak to the entire community once we have a better spot. So that's probably, if I had to guess, honestly, with historic preservation, because of how kind of off the rails it went. I absolutely do. It should be. Like I said to everybody multiple times, historic preservation belongs to the entire historic village of Ballston Spa, not just 4 streets. And we have to make sure that we target it correctly, but also balance what the meaning of it is, what the cost could be to certain people too. I think that's probably more or less in the next 4 to 6 months type of approach. That is not something we're going to try to rush through in 3 months. And there's no way to rush it through in 3 months if we wanted to.
So I'm correct in understanding the deadline for this,
Goal. It's a goal.
but the deadline for the proposed deadline for this current objective would come before flushing out the historic district.
Correct. The current historic code will be inserted or incorporated by reference into the new code. So it's a status quo. All we have to do at that point is just make sure that there's some kind of conflict between what that code says and what this code says. That code still has its dominance in place during that time frame.
Thank you for addressing that.
You got it.
I understand.
Anytime.
I just, I just wanted to make sure that we had well, we're all here, us village friends have that, those dates on our calendar. That's the last thing I'll talk about tonight is, as I was going through it, the inspection and notice of violation, which gives the building inspector is authorized to enter, inspect, and examine legally any building structure, place, premise, or use in the village of Ballston Spa. With regard to the provisions of this chapter, to issue a written order for proper remedy or compliance or condition found to be in violation thereof. Am I correct in reading this, that this gives the building inspector the legal authority to enter any building? Do they need a warrant? How is this constitutional? And has this been reviewed by an attorney?
So, first of all, as I said, you stated earlier, legal has not reviewed this yet, so there's going to be a number.
They might want to review that.
We'll just leave it at
Okay.
Okay. Sandra Bondwell,
I'm good.
great. Keith Harris,
I'm all set.
great. Julia Baskin,
Yeah, hi, that's me. I'm gonna stand and short, and I'm pretty sure nobody can hear me. So my question is about the downtown, the proposed flexibility on height for the downtown area. You have mentioned that there would be flexibility for unique circumstances. So if you could say more, what flexibility are we talking about, and what would be the unique circumstances, and how clarified are those in the current code or proposed code?
Sure. So as it relates to height specifically,
Yeah.
right? So your current code allows 50 feet height. This says 50 feet as well. I haven't seen elevations exactly for buildings, but there's a number of buildings that look like they are currently about that. There was the option, again, feedback to, through a special permit process, allow potentially up to 10 more feet for certain circumstances, such as where you have topographic changes, where the location of the building is such that it's not adjacent to residential areas or other areas where there would be those sort of visual impacts. There might have been a couple other criteria I can't recall off the top of my head, but that the intent was, again, it's not for the standard situation.
Okay, and it's no more than 10 feet is what.
That's how it's written, correct?
okay. Carol Blansberg,
I'm good.
okay. Matt Lustbader,
Nothing.
Amanda Russell,
All set.
all right. Molly and Chris Scott,
Hi. I do have a couple of questions, but I know we're at the end here. From the definition that you provided about the downtown transition, how and why are the county buildings changing from residential in the middle of a residential neighborhood into downtown transition? And if and when or whatever happens to the county offices, what kind of process or safety net is in place for the residents of that area to have an opinion about what happens with that space?
So again, the draft of the boundaries, it's an iterative process. I take input from, it was from the zoning board of appeals members and planning board in terms of where it seemed to make sense. If there's certain properties, we don't know every single property off the top of, when we're looking at an entire village. So if there are properties where it doesn't make sense to have changed what it was today to what it would be tomorrow, very happy to make those changes. It sounds like those properties are of that concern.
It's the only property downtown transition in this whole area. So a lot of downtown transition is downtown area. This is 2-3 blocks up the hill and just one building. Zone. So it's very concerning.
Right.
Yeah.
all right, Chelsea Latham,
That's me. I'm also on McMaster Street. I second everything that she said. It just doesn't make any sense to have whatever downtown transition means, because it's still the definition is very vague. I get like why you would put that in there, it's like a big huge building, but, it has a bunch of rules, so. I think it should go back to residential.
Just as a reminder, we are nearing 4 minutes, so I'm just gonna ask people to be quick, not because your comments are not important. I just want to make sure we can get as many people as possible, so please send them to the email. Gary Fleury?
No, thank you.
Okay. Gina Marazzi?
No, thank you.
Okay. Brad Johnson and Mary O'Neill? Oh, shoot, okay. Karen
Avenarius.
Hi.
Was I close?
Yeah, close. It was good. We own Cunningham's Ice and Coin Laundry right at the corner, which is has been a topic quite a few times, and it's not zoned, it's zoned residential. And it's the reason why there is zoning here in Ballston Spa. You know, I've said this multiple times. They created the zoning.
1949 because of you.
Yes, not because of me, it was not alive then, but previous owners. I should say, I do because this look youthful. And then the historic district came through East High Street because of Rite Aid coming in and proposing their property to remove some of this, so the historic district came through. We're currently zoned as a housing, and we're not housing. We're on the major intersection, the gateway into the village of Ballston Spa. We take pride, our family takes pride in this. We appreciate everyone in the community that comes to our laundromat, comes and buys ice from us. We're a very community oriented family, but we're also concerned that we're in a residential area and we're on two major highways, 50 and 67, heading out to Amsterdam and getting into the village. So we are a major property. We created the zoning because of some of the things. So I think that our biggest concern is that I think it turned into downtown transition, but we don't fit any of those categories. And that has been something I have brought up multiple times, is these buildings that don't fit into some of these current zonings, and to look at them. And so if something needs to be done with that, that's all. Thank you very much, by the way, for everyone who's been on the committee.
Okay, as I said, we're nearing 9. We're gonna just take 5 minutes. Is there anybody who wants to speak that has not spoken? I will keep these lists. Okay. Let me just keep your hands up real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4.
But not really.
Oh, sorry.
Picked her out.
Is that it? Are these 5? Okay, let's start with you.
So I wanted to second Sarah McMaster. I wanted to just second what we heard earlier about the downtown transition zone being on a residential street on McMaster and just that whole property. It really didn't make sense to me, and it's very vague. It is, I'd like to see that kept residential. I also wanted to quickly mention the highway business district. I do feel that there was something mentioned about landscaping being important, but to me, it's important to keep that pedestrian friendly. I know that's not supposed to be part of the zoning, but I think since landscaping was mentioned, sidewalks could also be included. Because people do walk up that corridor. I see them all the time. I've done it. I've walked the Ocean State job lot, so I think it's a good thing to think about that. I also want to mention the former Maplewood Manor property. It's 15 acres. That was county owned. We can see that county or public owned properties can transition to private. So we want to keep that in mind. If the lot size is indeed residential 1B, which is the 4,000 square feet, that would be approximately like 150 houses there. So I just want us to keep that in mind as we're looking at this new, much smaller to me, lot size. We have about 10,000 square feet for our lot on McMaster, and that's pretty much, it seems like what other folks at. So just wondering why that was determined.
So like I said, I feel like I've reiterated a few times that again, there was issues with that downtown and we're gonna look at it.
Great, thank you. Anyone speak? Yeah. Karen Welsh, Ballston 78 Ballston. Moved here 51 years ago, raised my kids here, went to school here, a village they love to come back to. And in working in the community in the past 20, 30 years, we've really tried to make sure that this village stays the kind of village that people want to live in, work in, and come to. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. And I'd like us to keep trying to do that and make sure that there aren't little inroads that are gonna undo some of that. And then I just wanna say, I have never heard that Ballston Spa has an adult area. I don't think it's a proper thing. I don't care about the cost. Appreciate it.
Gary?
Gary Stevenson, 45 West High Street, across the street. I heard the whole thing about the county property being suddenly rezoned into downtown transition. This just happened a couple of weeks ago. This was never that way. It had been a residential for 30 years or more. And there's, I don't see any conceivable reason why it should be downtown transitional. We've got more about that, but I won't talk about it. I really have a major concern about the splitting of the boundaries of these districts across the middle line of the road. This is an example right here where everything on the north side of West High Street there's no businesses in there. There are only residential properties. There's churches and there's exempt building here. So there's no reason, okay, if we're trying to fix the zoning by having it match the current conditions to have it be downtown transition. You should be still residential because that's what it is. You split it right down the middle, residential on that side, downtown transition on this side. I do not want to be looking at a gas station. I don't want to be looking at a 3-story apartment building. I don't want to be looking at a car wash on this side of the street. It makes no sense. It doesn't contribute to the character of the village to have things like this on one side and things like this on the other side, okay? High Street is not the only example of that. Saratoga Avenue has the same problem. Malta Avenue from Ralph Street continuing east onto East Grove Street has the same problem. So it's in multiple places in the village. I will submit my written part that goes into it in detail, okay, because it's a big issue and does not contribute to character. Thank you.
You in the back.
Yes, Alex Machado. Well, I happen to be standing in front of the October map and just looking at that. I think that kind of is more appropriate than what we're looking at today. I think that there's been a lot of effort made to try to change, to try to make changes, but also make zoning that matches what's already there in a way that doesn't pursue the comprehensive plan where we're trying to go. I think breaking up the zoning a little bit more by community allows you to make zoning that pushes things where we want it to go while respecting the overall community that's already there. That way you can fine tune to make more people compliant without applying rules to neighborhoods that compliance in one neighborhood is ridiculous for the other. So that would let you be both more directive and more people would be compliant. And then also I've been to a number of zoning advisory committee meetings that have apparently not been official meetings and have been surprised to be sitting there and they're presented with a map that I'm seeing it the same day that they're seeing it. And I don't think that's your fault, but if there's any way that any of these back and forths could be communicated to everybody so that the community could stay involved, that would be helpful for everybody here, I think. And then finally, There are a lot of things tonight you said are things that could be done, but aren't maybe standard practice. And I think that everybody in the village on a lot of that would like to see as much protections for things like parks and other key features in the comprehensive plan. Put those protections in this code. As a homeowner or developer coming to this area, the more detailed the zoning code can be, it makes a one-stop shop to look at what can I put in this property. And it doesn't make sense for somebody to come here and be like, oh, it's zoned residential, get interested, it turns out, oh, there's some other law here that defines it as a park. If you can define it in one place and protect it, it both makes it harder to change just because there's one extra box that you need to check and just further protect it. So I guess that's it for today. I'll do written ones, and also just to point out, the written ones are all being posted online too. So I don't know if you guys said that, but all of the comments that are going up are getting posted onto that website as well. So everybody can go on and see what everybody else said. I think that's important.
There's one hand over here, right? Yes.
Yeah. Josh Nessa on Chapman Street. I guess I kind of want to echo the point there that I'm a bit concerned about the lack of clarity and protection of open space in what I'm seeing here. And I definitely encourage you to make the point about the sort of power and elegance of having the state do it. I guess my concern with that is if that was a value that we had as a community, and that's sort of a lever that we can use, why would we rely on some other entity to do that? Why would we work that into our own plans? And it doesn't mean, don't ask the state to pursue that as well, but why would we ever entrust someone else with limited control over to protect a thing that we want protected? So that's my concern with open space. I don't see that in the plan, and I don't see that. And it seems like it is a widespread value. So I'd love to see that emphasized more rather than entrusted to the state doing something. Thank you, that's my concern.
Is there anybody else before we finish for the night? Last but not least.
Okay, one thing, Marilyn Stevenson, Zoning Advisory Committee, our next meeting is April 17th here at 7 p.m. and we welcome you. We do have to put this room back together again. It doesn't mean that every single chair has to be picked up, but we need to set up tables with chairs behind them because this room will be used tomorrow morning for some training and we have to return it. So if you took your chair off one of the dollies, I would ask you put it back in place to help us out. Thank you.
All right, before you do anything, I think they're gonna close out the meeting. So just wait a minute.
Just want to say thank you for all the input. Again, I appreciate all the comments, so it's all very helpful to me, so thank you.
Just two last things here. First off, let's hear for Chris because this is thank you, job. And a round of applause for all of you to yourselves because this was phenomenal turnout, phenomenally run in terms of attitudes and respect and everything else. We couldn't have asked for a better night tonight. So thank you to all of you. Have a great night. There's a lot more to come out of this.
Yes. Oh, no.